The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, the kind of place where whispers felt too loud and truth often sounded small. Sunlight slipped through narrow windows, cutting the air into pale stripes that landed across a thin black teenager standing alone at the defense table. His name was Marcus Hale. 17. Hands clasped tight, knuckles pale, heart pounding so loud it felt like everyone could hear it. At the bench, Judge Robert Whitman leaned back, lips curled into something close to a smile, but not the kind that offered comfort, the kind that cut. Well, the judge chuckled softly, glancing down at Marcus. This should be educational. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the room. Marcus swallowed. His mother sat behind him, eyes wet, praying this wouldn't break her son. Before the story pulls you any further, tell me, where are you watching from right now? Somewhere quiet, or somewhere loud like this courtroom felt? Drop your city below. It still amazes me how far one human story can reach. Marcus hadn't slept the night before. The cheap motel bed creaked every time he turned, and he turned a lot. Outside, police sirens sang through the dark like warnings meant just for him. He kept replaying the moment of his arrest, hands on the hood, cold metal cuffs, a voice barking orders as if he were already guilty. The charge was minor, a misunderstanding blown up by fear and assumption, but in this courtroom, it felt like a life sentence waiting to happen. Judge Whitman adjusted his glasses, scanning the file with exaggerated slowness. "Let me guess," he said aloud, tapping the paper. "No prior record, good grades, bright future, written all over you?" He looked up, smirk deepening. "I've heard that one before." Marcus's lawyer hadn't shown. A last-minute emergency, they said. A public defender would step in briefly. Briefly felt like forever when your future sat on the line. Marcus's mother, Denise, clutched her purse so tightly the strap dug into her palm. She wanted to stand up, to scream that her son was more than a stereotype, more than this judge's amusement. But fear glued her to the bench. Marcus lifted his eyes, just for a second. The judge noticed. "Something you'd like to add?" Whitman asked, eyebrow raised. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. His voice felt trapped somewhere between his chest and his throat. "No, sir," he whispered. The judge laughed. Not loudly. Worse, softly, as if sharing a private joke with the room. "That's what I thought." The bailiff shifted uncomfortably. A woman in the gallery looked down at her hands. Even the court reporter paused, fingers hovering. Something about the moment felt wrong, heavier than procedure. Marcus stared at the floor, counting the scratches in the tile. 1, 2, 3. Each one felt like a reminder. Stay small, stay quiet, survive. But inside him, something older stirred, memories of late nights at the kitchen table, law books borrowed from the library, his mother falling asleep in a chair while he read case after case. Dreams he'd never said out loud because they sounded too big for someone like him. Judge Whitman cleared his throat. "Given the circumstances," he said, voice sharp again, "this court will." The door at the back of the courtroom creaked open. Every head turned. The interruption was small, almost polite, but it sliced through the judge's sentence like a blade. A man stepped inside, calm, composed, wearing a dark suit that didn't try to impress but somehow did anyway. His eyes went straight to Marcus. Not with pity, with recognition. The judge frowned. "Court is in session," he snapped. The man nodded once. "I know," he said evenly. "That's why I'm here." Marcus felt his heart stumble. He didn't know why, only that something had shifted, like the air before a storm. The man who entered didn't rush. His shoes made a steady, confident sound against the marble floor. Not loud, not timid. Judge Whitman's irritation sharpened as he leaned forward. "Sir, identify yourself," he ordered, tapping the gavel once, harder than necessary. The man stopped beside Marcus, close enough that Marcus could smell clean soap and something faintly familiar, like old books. "My name is Daniel Brooks," the man said calmly, "and I'm here to represent the defendant." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Marcus's head snapped up. "Represent me?" His pulse surged, confused and cautious all at once. Denise leaned forward, disbelief frozen on her face. Judge Whitman scoffed. "You're late,"
Yes, Your Honor,
he
I
said.
do.
"And this
Very
young
well.
man
Proceed."
already has court-appointed counsel." Daniel didn't argue. He simply turned slightly, his voice lowering, not for the judge, but for Marcus. "You okay?" he asked softly. It was such a small thing. No grand speech. No rescue music swelling. Just a question. But Marcus felt it land in his chest like warmth after a long cold night. He nodded once, barely trusting his voice. If you were standing where Marcus was right now, mocked, cornered, judged before you spoke, what would you have done? Would you shrink or stand taller? Be honest in the comments. And if this moment stirred something in you, tap like. Sometimes that's the only way to say, "I see this too." Daniel turned back to the bench. "With respect, Your Honor," he said evenly, "the court-appointed attorney requested my assistance. I'm licensed, present, and prepared." Judge Whitman leaned back again, studying him. Something flickered behind the judge's eyes, annoyance mixed with a hint of calculation. "Very well," he said at last, "but let's not waste the court's time." Daniel nodded. He placed a hand lightly on Marcus's shoulder, just once, then stepped forward. For the first time since entering the room, Marcus felt his shoulders ease. Not because everything was suddenly fine, but because someone had chosen to stand with him. Daniel spoke clearly, dismantling the assumptions woven through the charge. He cited facts, timelines, witness inconsistencies. His words weren't flashy, they were precise, deliberate, like stones placed carefully across a river. Judge Whitman's smirk thinned. As Daniel spoke, Marcus's mind drifted, not away, but backward. To nights when he sat at the small kitchen table, highlighters scattered, reading Supreme Court opinions far beyond his grade level. To Denise watching him with tired pride. "You sure you don't want to be a normal kid?" she'd asked once, half joking. Marcus had smiled. "This is normal for me." The judge interrupted. "Counsel," Whitman said sharply, "are you suggesting the arresting officer fabricated his report?" Daniel didn't flinch. "I'm suggesting the truth deserves precision," he replied. "And my client deserves dignity." The word dignity hung in the air. Marcus glanced at the judge. The laughter from earlier felt distant now, like something remembered with shame. Whitman adjusted his robe, clearing his throat. Denise pressed a hand to her mouth. Tears slipped free, silent. As the hearing paused briefly, Daniel leaned down again. "You did nothing wrong," he said quietly. "No matter how this started." Marcus swallowed hard. "Thank you," he whispered. Two words, heavy with everything he couldn't say. Have you ever had someone step in for you when the world felt stacked against your name? If yes, write yes below, and if you can, tell us who they were. Gratitude has a way of traveling further than pain. When proceedings resumed, Judge Whitman's tone shifted, still firm, but stripped of mockery. He asked questions now. Real ones. The courtroom leaned in. Then Daniel said something that made the room go still. "Before we proceed further," he said, "there's a clarification the court should be aware of." Judge Whitman raised an eyebrow. "And that is?" Daniel straightened, his voice calm but unyielding. "My client is not just a defendant. He is also a law student, admitted early under a special academic review." The beat. Then another. Marcus felt the room tilt, as if the truth had dropped something heavy onto the floor. The judge's mouth opened slightly, then closed. Daniel continued, "Which makes the assumptions made earlier particularly concerning." Silence pressed in from every side. The judge's face drained of color, realization dawning too late. And just as Marcus realized the weight of what had been said, and what was about to follow, Judge Whitman leaned forward again, voice suddenly tight, and asked the question that would change everything. "What did you just say?" Judge Whitman asked, his voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier confidence. Daniel didn't repeat himself immediately. He let the silence do its work. Then, calmly, Marcus Hale was admitted into a pre-law collegiate program at 15. He's completed coursework most first-year law students struggle with. Today, he stands here not because he's ignorant of the law, but because the law failed to see him. A low murmur swept through the courtroom. The bailiff's posture stiffened. The court reporter's fingers resumed, faster now. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He hadn't wanted this revealed like this. Not here. Not like a weapon. But once the truth was out, it felt oddly freeing, like a weight he'd been carrying alone had finally been seen. Judge Whitman adjusted his glasses again. This time, his hands weren't steady. That information, he said, was not included in the file. No, Daniel replied. It wasn't. The judge glanced down at the papers, the same papers he'd smirked at earlier. His earlier laughter echoed in the back of the room like something sour. Marcus remembered the first time he'd fallen in love with the law. He was 11, sitting on the living room floor, watching a documentary about a wrongful conviction. He didn't understand every word, but he understood injustice. He understood the quiet power of truth when someone finally listened. Why didn't you say anything? Judge Whitman asked Marcus suddenly. Every eye turned. Marcus hesitated. His voice came out steady, but soft. Because it shouldn't matter, he said. I shouldn't have to be exceptional to be treated fairly. The words landed harder than a shout. Judge Whitman leaned back, blinking. For the first time, he looked unsure. Daniel continued, guiding the hearing forward, but something had changed. The courtroom was no longer amused. It was awake. Witness testimony was re-examined. Timelines questioned. Details once brushed aside were now handled carefully, almost reverently. Denise watched her son with tears she didn't wipe away. She remembered nights when the power went out and Marcus studied by flashlight. Mornings when she worked double shifts while he memorized legal definitions instead of hanging out with friends. She'd worried she was pushing him too hard. Now she realized he'd been pulling himself forward all along. Halfway through the proceedings, there was a short recess. People stood, whispering. The earlier tension had transformed into something heavier, accountability. Marcus stepped aside with Daniel near the windows. Sunlight hit Marcus's face fully for the first time that day. You didn't have to say all that, Marcus murmured. Daniel smiled gently. Yes, I did. Very well. Because truth doesn't whisper when it's been ignored. Marcus nodded, absorbing it. Now it's your turn. Pause for a moment. Think about one small act of kindness or fairness you showed recently, even when it was inconvenient. Share it below. Someone reading might need that reminder tonight more than you know. When court resumed, Judge Whitman's demeanor was noticeably altered. He cleared his throat before speaking, choosing his words carefully now. The court acknowledges, he said, that assumptions may have been premature. The word tasted thin, but it was something. Daniel pressed forward, requesting dismissal based on procedural errors. Each point was met with less resistance than before. The prosecution faltered. Their confidence had evaporated. Then, quietly, almost reluctantly, Judge Whitman said, "Motion granted." The sound of the gavel this time was different. Final. Denise gasped. Marcus closed his eyes for a second, letting the relief wash through him, not like fireworks, but like rain after a drought. As people began to file out, Judge Whitman remained seated. He didn't move, didn't speak. Marcus turned to leave when the judge called out, "Mr. Hale." Marcus stopped. "Yes, Your Honor." Whitman stood. Slowly. "I owe you an apology," he said, voice low. The courtroom hushed again. "My behavior earlier was inappropriate. And wrong.
Do you understand?
Apologies don't erase harm."
Yes, Your Honor.
Marcus knew that.
Very
but
well.
they can open
Proceed.
doors. "I will do better," the judge added. It sounded less like a promise to Marcus, and more like one he was making to himself. Outside the courtroom, the hallway buzzed with noise. Reporters murmured. Phones were raised. But Marcus felt oddly quiet inside. Daniel shook his hand. "You handled yourself with grace," he said. Marcus looked down the hall, then back. "I learned from watching people who didn't," he replied. As they walked away together, Marcus didn't know yet that this moment would ripple outward, beyond headlines, beyond this building, reaching places he'd never see. But it would. And the next test wouldn't be about law at all. The courthouse doors closed behind them with a hollow thud, cutting off the noise like a final breath held too long. Outside, the city moved on, cars passing, people arguing into phones, a street vendor calling out prices, but Marcus stood still on the steps, the stone cool beneath his shoes, trying to understand how something so heavy had finally lifted. Denise reached him and pulled him into her arms without saying a word. Her body shook once, then again. "I was so scared," she whispered into his shoulder. "I know," Marcus said softly. "Me too." Daniel gave them space, stepping a few feet away, eyes scanning the street like a man used to standing between trouble and the people he cared about. Marcus watched him for a moment, curiosity mixing with gratitude. "Why did you come?" Marcus asked when Daniel returned. Daniel exhaled, slow. "Because I used to be you," he said. "Different details. Same assumptions." Marcus waited. "I didn't have anyone step in when I was younger," Daniel continued. "I promised myself I'd be that person when I could." The words settled deep. If that realization hit your chest the way it hit his, leave a red heart. Some moments don't need explanation, they just need to be felt. News of the hearing spread faster than Marcus expected. By evening, clips were circulating online. The judge's laughter, the interruption, the stunned silence after the truth surfaced. People argued in comments. Some defended. Some denied. Many recognized something they'd seen before. Marcus didn't read most of it. That night, back at their apartment, the air felt different. Lighter but fragile, like glass after a storm. Denise cooked too much food as if feeding the relief might make it stay. Marcus sat at the table, textbooks pushed aside, staring at his hands. "I keep thinking," Denise said carefully, "about how close that was." Marcus nodded. "Me too." Later, alone in his room, Marcus replayed the judge's laugh in his head, not because it hurt, but because it taught him something. Power didn't always shout. Sometimes it smirked. The next weeks brought invitations Marcus didn't ask for. A scholarship interview. A panel discussion. A request to speak at a youth center about resilience. Each one felt strange, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit yet. Daniel stayed in touch, checking in with brief messages. "How's school? Remember to rest. Proud of you." One afternoon, Marcus found himself standing outside that same courthouse again, not summoned, but invited. Daniel had asked him to observe a hearing. Different judge, he'd said. Different energy. Inside, the courtroom felt smaller now. Less mysterious. Marcus noticed details he'd missed before. The way the judge's tone shifted depending on who stood before them, how lawyers framed people with words before facts ever entered. During a recess, a young defendant, nervous, eyes darting, sat alone at a bench. Marcus recognized the posture instantly. Without thinking, he sat beside him. "You okay?" Marcus asked quietly. The boy shrugged. "Guess." Marcus smiled gently. "That's normal." It wasn't advice. It wasn't strategy. It was presence. And Marcus realized then that the ripple Daniel had spoken about had already begun. Weeks later, an envelope arrived. Heavy paper. Official seal. Inside was a letter from the court's administrative office. A formal notice. Judge Whitman had requested a meeting. Denise's face tightened when Marcus told her. "You don't owe him anything," she said. "I know," Marcus replied. "But I think I want to go." The meeting was brief. Professional. Whitman didn't defend himself. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He spoke instead about bias training, about revisiting courtroom conduct, about changing systems that had grown too comfortable. "I can't undo what I did," Whitman said. "But I can decide who I become after." Marcus listened. Not to absolve, but to witness. Change, he knew, required being seen. When Marcus left the building, he didn't feel victorious. He felt grounded. At home that night, he opened his law book again. The words looked the same, statutes, cases, footnotes, but he read them differently now. Not as armor, as tools. He wasn't studying to prove anything anymore. He was studying to protect. And as the city outside dimmed into evening, Marcus understood something quietly powerful. The law had once stood over him, laughing, dismissive. One day, he would stand within it, steady, human, unafraid. The real test, he knew, wasn't whether he could succeed, but whether he could stay kind when the world gave him every excuse not to. The invitation arrived on a quiet Tuesday, Slipped under the door sometime between Dawn and Denise leaving for work. Marcus found it when he came back from class, the envelope resting on the mat like it had been thinking there for hours. Inside was a formal request from a community legal forum, a small auditorium, a moderated conversation about justice, bias, and the future of the courts. Judge Whitman would be there. Marcus sat on the edge of his bed, the letter trembling slightly between his fingers. Outside, a siren wailed and faded. Life uninterrupted. He tried to picture the judge without the bench, without the robe, without the power that had once pressed down on him. The image wouldn't settle. That night, Marcus barely touched his dinner. "You don't have to go," Denise said gently, watching him push rice around his plate. "I know," Marcus replied. "But I keep thinking, if I don't, I'll always wonder who I'm becoming." The auditorium smelled like old carpet and fresh coffee. Rows of folding chairs filled slowly, people murmuring, programs rustling. Marcus stood backstage with Daniel, palms damp, heart steady but alert. "You ready?" Daniel asked. Marcus nodded. "I think so." When they stepped into the light, applause rose, hesitant at first, then fuller. Marcus scanned the crowd, spotting faces young and old, some curious, some guarded. And then he saw him. Judge Whitman sat in the front row. No robe, no gavel, just a man in a gray suit, hands folded, posture stiff. The moderator opened with pleasantries, then invited Marcus to speak. He didn't prepare a speech. He spoke the way he'd learned to survive, plainly. "I didn't come here as a symbol," Marcus said. "I came here as someone who was hurt, and listened anyway." He described the courtroom. The laughter. The silence after. Not to accuse, but to illuminate. The room held its breath. Then the moderator turned to Judge Whitman. "Would you like to respond?" Whitman stood slowly. The room felt smaller again. "I won't justify my behavior," he said. "I won't explain it away. I was wrong. And the hardest part wasn't being called out. It was realizing how easy it had been to forget the humanity in front of me." Marcus watched him closely. This wasn't the courtroom. There was no obligation here. Only choice. Before the discussion moved forward, ask yourself this. Could you forgive someone who laughed at you when you were at your most vulnerable? Type "forgive" if you think you could, or "never" if that wound would stay too deep. There's no wrong answer, only honest ones. As the conversation continued, questions came from the audience. A college student asked about fear. A mother asked about her son. A retired clerk asked about accountability. Marcus answered what he could. When he didn't know, he said so. Afterward, as the crowd thinned, Whitman approached him. "No cameras. No microphones. I don't expect anything from you," Whitman said quietly. "I just wanted to thank you for not turning away." Marcus considered him for a long moment. The memory of that laugh flickered, not sharp anymore, but present. "I'm not forgiving what happened," Marcus said. "I'm choosing what happens next." Whitman nodded, eyes glassy. "That's more than I deserve." Outside the air was cool. Daniel walked beside Marcus in silence until they reached the corner. "You okay?" Daniel asked. Marcus looked up at the streetlight humming overhead. "I think forgiveness isn't a moment," he said. "It's a direction." Weeks later, Marcus found himself busier than ever. Classes intensified. Internships beckoned. But he still made time for the youth center every Thursday evening. He sat with kids who didn't trust the system and didn't ask them to. One night, a girl named Ava looked up from her notebook and asked, "Do judges ever change?" Marcus smiled softly. "Some do," he said, "and some don't. But the law changes when people do." On his walk home, Marcus realized something unexpected. The anger he'd carried had loosened its grip. Not vanished, but softened. In its place was something sturdier. Purpose. And as he unlocked his door, the phone in his pocket buzzed with a message from Daniel. "Proud of the man you're becoming." Marcus leaned his head back against the door, eyes closed, breathing deep. The journey ahead was still long. The system still imperfect. But for the first time, the weight of it didn't feel unbearable. Because hope, he was learning, wasn't loud. It was persistent. Spring arrived quietly, the way it often does when you're not looking for it. Trees outside Marcus's apartment pushed out new leaves almost overnight, and the air carried a softness that hadn't been there before. Life moved forward, not dramatically, not perfectly, but forward all the same. Marcus's days settled into a rhythm. Morning classes, afternoon study, evenings at the youth center. He no longer felt like he was running from something, though he knew the past hadn't vanished. It had simply taken its place, behind him, shaping but no longer steering. One Thursday evening, the youth center was fuller than usual. Kids crowded around tables, laughter bouncing off the walls. Marcus moved between them, answering questions, breaking up arguments, listening more than he spoke. A boy named Ethan tugged at his sleeve. "Mr. Hale," he said, voice low, "is it true you stood up to a judge?" Marcus smiled faintly. "I didn't stand up to him," he said. "I stood up for myself." Ethan nodded, absorbing that difference like it mattered. Because it did. Later that night, Marcus walked home under streetlights that hummed softly overhead. He thought about how close he'd come to giving up, not on school, but on believing the system could ever be better. Hope, he'd learned, wasn't something you felt once and kept forever. It was something you chose again and again. The phone rang as he unlocked his door. "Denise, I just wanted to hear your voice," she said. "I saw you on the center's website. They're calling you a mentor now." Marcus laughed quietly. "That sounds serious." "It is," she said. "And I'm proud of you. I always was." After they hung up, Marcus sat on the edge of his bed, shoes still on, letting the words sink in. Proud. It still felt new. Weeks later, Daniel invited him to sit in on another case, this time involving a young man not much older than Marcus had been in court. The fear was the same. The posture too. Marcus recognized it instantly. During a break, the young man whispered, "Do you think they'll listen?" Marcus met his eyes. "They listened to me," he said. "Not at first. But eventually." That was the truth. And sometimes truth was enough. The hearing ended better than expected. Not perfect, but fair. Outside the courthouse, the young man hugged his mother, relief spilling out in sobs he didn't try to hide. Marcus watched from a distance, something warm blooming in his chest. Daniel joined him. "You see it now, don't you?" he said. Marcus nodded. "Change doesn't always look like justice right away," he replied. "Sometimes it looks like fewer scars." That night, Marcus stayed up late, books spread across his desk. But this time, he wasn't studying out of fear. He was preparing. In his notebook, between case notes and definitions, he wrote a single line. "Be the person you needed. If you believe hope still has a place in this world, even when it takes time, even when it comes quietly, comment "Amen" below. Let's leave a sign for someone scrolling tonight, wondering if light ever really returns." The semester ended with a small ceremony at the youth center. No speeches. Just hugs, laughter, and photos taped crookedly to the wall. When Marcus left that night, Ava chased after him. "Marcus," she said, breathless, "I decided. I want to study law." He smiled at her, seeing a reflection of his younger self. "Then don't let anyone tell you who you're supposed to be," he said. "Not even yourself on the hard days." She grinned and ran back inside. As summer edged closer, Marcus received an acceptance letter, a full scholarship to a respected pre-law program. He stared at it for a long time before calling Denise, his voice breaking halfway through the first sentence. "I knew it," she said, crying openly now. "I always knew." That evening, Marcus walked the same streets he'd once walked with fear pressing down on his chest. They looked different now, not because they'd changed, but because he had. The world hadn't suddenly become fair. Judges still erred. Systems still failed. But Marcus understood something essential. Progress was built by people who refused to harden. He reached his building, paused, and looked back down the street one last time before heading inside. The climax of his journey wasn't behind him. It wasn't ahead either. It was unfolding, every time he chose empathy over bitterness, courage over silence. And one final choice still waited. The summer before Marcus left for school moved slowly, like it wanted to give him time to notice everything. The cracked sidewalk outside his building. The neighbor who always watered plants at dawn. the corner store clerk who'd watched him grow up and now asked about law school with quiet pride. On his last Thursday at the youth center, the room felt heavier than usual. The kids sensed change before it was explained. Marcus gathered them in a loose circle, the hum of the old lights buzzing above. "I'm not disappearing," he said gently. "I'm just going to learn more, so I can come back stronger." Ethan frowned. Adults always say that. Marcus knelt so they were eye level. "Then hold me to it," he said. "Promise me you'll do the same, leave, learn, return." One by one, they nodded. Even Ethan. Afterward, Ava walked him to the door. "When you're a lawyer," she asked, "will you remember us?" Marcus smiled. "I'm becoming one because of you," he replied. The night before his departure, Denise sat at the kitchen table, folding and refolding the same shirt. Marcus watched her quietly. "You okay?" he asked. She laughed softly. "I just keep thinking about how scared I was in that courtroom," she said. "And how proud I am now. Both can exist, I guess." Marcus hugged her, holding on longer than usual. "You carried me here," he said. "No," she corrected. "We carried each other." On the morning he left, Daniel drove him to the station. They didn't talk much at first. The city slid past the window. Familiar streets, familiar corners, each one a chapter. "You know," Daniel said finally, "there will be days when this system disappoints you again." Marcus nodded. "I know. And days when you'll be tempted to protect yourself by becoming colder." Marcus looked out the window, then back. "I know that too." Daniel smiled. "Just remember, the law doesn't need more sharp minds alone. It needs steady hearts." At the platform they shook hands. Then Daniel pulled him into a brief, firm hug. "You're ready," he said. The train ride was long. Marcus watched landscapes change, thinking about the boy he'd been, small in a courtroom, voice nearly swallowed by fear. That boy felt distant now, but not gone. He carried him forward. At orientation, Marcus blended in more than he expected. Other students were nervous too. Brilliant, uncertain, hopeful. He wasn't alone. During a discussion on ethics, a professor posed a question: "What is justice without compassion?" The room went quiet. Marcus raised his hand. "It's procedure," he said. "But it's not justice." The professor nodded slowly. Weeks turned into months. The work was hard. Some nights, Marcus felt the old pressure return. The need to prove, to outperform, to armor himself. On those nights, he went back to his notebook and reread the line he'd written months ago. "Be the person you needed." One afternoon, an email arrived from the youth center. A photo attached, Ethan holding a certificate, Ava smiling beside him. The subject line read, "You kept your promise." Marcus leaned back in his chair, eyes closing. The ripple was still moving. Near the end of the semester, Marcus was invited to observe a judicial ethics seminar. At the back of the room, he spotted a familiar profile. Judge Whitman. Older now. Quieter. Listening. Their eyes met briefly. Whitman nodded, not as authority, but as acknowledgement. Marcus nodded back. Not everything needed words. As Marcus walked out into the late afternoon sun, he felt something settle, not closure, but clarity. His path wasn't about winning arguments or correcting every wrong. It was about presence. About refusing to let power erase humanity. And as he stepped into the crowd, blending into the city once more, he understood that the story hadn't been about a judge learning a lesson. It had been about a boy becoming a man without losing his kindness. The final chapter wasn't written yet, but its purpose was clear. Years later, Marcus stood in a hallway that smelled nothing like the courthouse of his youth. This place was newer, brighter, glass walls, soft lighting, a quiet hum of voices moving with purpose. He adjusted the cuffs of his suit, the fabric unfamiliar but welcome, like a future finally catching up to him. A small brass plaque beside the door read, "Marcus Hale, Attorney at Law." He rested his palm against it for a moment. Not to admire it, but to remember everything that had come before it. The motel room. The cold cuffs. The laughter that once echoed too loudly. The hand on his shoulder when he thought he was alone. Down the hall, a receptionist waved. "Your client is ready," she said. Marcus nodded and stepped into the room. A young man sat at the table, shoulders tight, eyes darting the way Marcus's once had. His mother sat beside him, hands clasped, fear carefully hidden behind strength. Marcus took a seat across from them, placing the file down gently. "I'm Marcus," he said, "and I'm here with you." The young man exhaled, just slightly. Enough. They talked through the details slowly. Marcus didn't rush. He explained. He listened. When the young man stumbled over his words, Marcus waited, never filling the silence for him. He knew how heavy silence could feel when no one respected it. In court, Marcus spoke clearly. Calmly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The facts stood. The humanity stood. When the judge ruled fairly, not generously, not harshly, just fairly, Marcus felt something warm settle in his chest. Not triumph. Alignment. Outside, the young man hugged his mother, relief spilling out in tears he didn't bother to hide. Marcus watched from a few steps back, giving them space. Some moments didn't belong to him. Later that evening, Marcus walked alone through the city, lights flickering on as dusk folded into night. He passed a courthouse, not the same one, but close enough to stir memory. For a moment, he imagined his younger self standing on those steps, heart racing, future uncertain. He wished he could tell that boy something simple. You survive this. And you stay kind. At home, Marcus opened a small box Denise had given him years ago. Inside were folded letters, old photos, and at the bottom, the notebook. He flipped to the page with the line written in careful ink. Be the person you needed. He smiled. If this story touched something in you, then don't just scroll away quietly. Tap like, not for me, but for the kid who stood in a courtroom and still chose dignity. One click is your way of saying, I felt that. I see you. Marcus closed the notebook and placed it back in the box. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, new chances to fail or to rise. He didn't expect perfection, from the law, from himself, from anyone. What he believed in now was something simpler and stronger. That power didn't have to humiliate. That intelligence didn't have to harden the heart. That justice, when guided by empathy, could heal instead of scar. Somewhere, a judge would pause before speaking. Somewhere, a frightened kid would feel less alone. Somewhere, a system would bend, just enough, because one person refused to forget their humanity. And that, Marcus knew, was how change really worked. Not loudly, not all at once, but steadily, with heart.